podcast. This is episode number 25. In this episode, Angela and I are going to be discussing the novel Almond. This is the first book that we've had on the podcast in a while. We discussed A Tale for the Time Being a while back, but we haven't gotten together to talk about another book in a while. This is one that Angela brought to the table. She had read it and recommended, thought it would be something I was interested in, and she was absolutely right. And so we got together to talk about it for this episode. This is a translated novel. It was originally written in Korean and later translated to English. And so part of our discussion, and I think something that's really interesting to think about as we're going through the novel, or if you decided to read it yourself, is how the translator tried to preserve the author's original intent as they brought it over to English, because there is a very specific voice. The narrator in this novel has a very specific voice that gives us a lot to talk about, and also sort of makes that an interesting thing to think about, that job. Just a heads up that there are some pretty heavy topics covered, or pretty heavy events that happen in this book, especially to children. So if you are not up for hearing about discussions of violence being done, so if you are not up for hearing about violence done to people and young children, or between young children, maybe you want to sit this one out, and we'll see you next week. Angela and I do try to keep our discussions brief and really focused around what is going on in the book when those topics do come up, but just, content warning that is something that we talk about this week. All right, you're going to hear Angela and mine's discussion about the novel Almond after this short break.
When did you... I know we've been trying to do this for a while, and that's my fault. When did you read this?
Last, in the fall. No, spring.
That was the first time you read it?
Yeah.
And then did you do a reread?
For this, yeah.
You did a read, okay. And that was a couple weeks ago?
Uh-huh.
All right. So what... Was this just a book you picked up pretty randomly, or was it
This was on BTS recommended book list.
Oh, really?
Yes, because the author is Korean. It's actually been translated into English.
And one of them read it or recommended it or something?
2 members were seen reading it in some show or whatever.
Mm.
So then it was sold out on Amazon for a really long time.
Yeah, okay. Okay,
That's
cool.
why I sent you the Kindle version.
Oh, got it. And do the members that were reading it, does it make sense that they would read this book based on what you know about their personalities or something?
Nah.
No?
I don't know. Look on BTS recommended books. They'll just some of the members are just seen reading a lot of books. Some of them are ones that we've heard of, like Alchemist and stuff. And it's just okay. Yeah.
They're people too. They read The Alchemist.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, so you got it off of BTS recommendation, and then first time you read it, what did you think? Were you good book? I mean, that's a pretty reductive way to put what did you think after the first time you read it?
Well, I read it in 2 hours the first time. Maybe not 2 hours. I read it in one sitting.
Okay.
I like that it was it felt like a fast read. I think I like that it was kind of fast paced.
I think the way it's broken up, right? There's these, I don't know if would you even call them chapters? Does a book, I forget if the book calls them chapters. They just have numbers, and they're right, they can be as short as a page or as long as 4 or 5 pages, but they're...
Yeah, because there's 75 of them. So
yeah,
they're called chapters.
They are called chapters, okay.
Yeah. I liked it. It kind of reminded me of a book that I would carry around in high school just so people thought I was cool, though.
But no one would know what this book is.
But it had an intriguing title. The cover was cool looking, and it was actually a good book, which was a plus. So that's, if I was in high school, I would definitely be carrying that around for a little bit.
Okay. The title is intriguing. It's a face with an eye that looks kind of like an almond.
Yeah.
Such is the name of the book, which we haven't actually said, right? So we're talking about Almond. A novel
by Won-pyung.
That's the author?
Yeah.
Okay, and then it was translated. We should get the translator. Let me look real quick. Because there's actually, I don't know if you read at the end, the translator wrote a little something at the end, just about sort of their process, their translating process. I don't have the name of the translator here. Written in Korean, translated into English. So I guess I didn't know. You sent it to me. You're like, you should read this. Oh, I guess why did you say I should read this? Just because you liked it, or you thought like specifically I would?
Because I liked it.
Oh, okay. That's good. That's good. That's fair. Yeah, I didn't know what to expect because the title's very, from the title it could be like anything, and from that first,
Thought it was about health foods.
Could
Thought
be.
it was about how so much water goes into making almonds.
It definitely could be. Yeah, that's a whole thing. But then right from that, like the first chapter, I think the first chapter is like 1 page, at least on the Kindle version, just like 2 paragraph, right? It's about our protagonist, who I was looking and I couldn't. Does our protagonist ever get a name?
Yeah, Sohn Won-pyung.
Sohn Won-pyung. Okay, so
Won-pyung is his first name.
Won-pyung. Okay, so should we call him Soon just for?
No. Won-pyung is his first name.
Won-pyung. Okay, so
remember from Itaewon class? Park Serowi, but Serowi is his first name.
Park Serowi, yes. That's right. We gotta finish that. We'll talk about that. But so he's sort of recalling, or you're getting it in real time, of this very horrific and violent scene where his grandma is killed in front of him and his mom is stabbed, right? And like you get to that later in the book, but like it's a pretty gripping, or like at least, I don't know. I don't love like super violent things, but it's like it gets your attention, at least that opening page about like, oh, I'm not exactly sure what it could be, but then the last line of that first page is just standing there with blank eyes as always, right? And kind of gives it sets up a little bit what this book is going to be about. We're definitely gonna like spoil the whole thing, right? But like if you like what we're talking about, you should go read it. How do you want to start with this, Ange? Do you want to talk about like favorite characters in general? Do you want to get in like plot stuff? I have like a bunch of notes, but they're all kind of a little like scattered.
Let's like go through the plot and then things will come in. I feel like that would make more sense.
Okay. So yeah, we have this opening page. He's remembering or sort of recalling what happened that day when his grandma was stabbed and she died, and his mom was stabbed and she went into a coma. That sort of sets the scene, but then from there we get a flashback where he's living with his mom and his grandma. His mom
how about there's like a little summary. How about I just read that and then
let's get that.
And then we'll like stop at like parts. Okay. So Yoon-jae, at 6 years old, witnesses a gang beating of a boy, yet he expresses none of the emotions one might expect after encountering a gruesome scene. In fact, Yoon-jae has never laughed or shown any sign of emotion. And so then they go to the doctor and reveals that Yoon-jae's amygdalae are smaller than average, so that's why he doesn't fear anger or read other people's emotions.
Mm-hmm. Right, and there's a part, I think it's pretty early, right? I think the reason the book's called Almond, right? Because the size of his amygdala is, right, it's compared to like an almond, and then he goes into this sort of whole reflection about the relationship between those two things, and he has this like special way that he like eats almonds, and it always reminds him of the doctor telling him that.
Yeah. So what was your like thought when you, because like for me personally, I always thought that's like when there's like books about like weird medical conditions, because this one's called alexithymia. I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm not a doctor.
Yeah.
But I kind of was just like, I wonder if it's gonna be like a super like edgy like book about like I don't feel anything. And I was happy that was wasn't the case. Judgment going into it. Did you have any thoughts?
Well, I think I was thinking about this the other day, and I think these books can, or these types of stories can kind of go in two ways. I think that's one of them, right? It can be this like thing where, yeah, they feel very separate from society because they have this like certain medical condition, right? Or just like how they look or whatever. Maybe they just feel that way, right? And then it's like you meet this person or you have this experience that like opens you up to the world, however you want to say it, right? Oftentimes it's a girl or like whatever, right? That's very like stereotypical. And then I think there's this other version where it is sort of, and maybe this doesn't happen so much because this is like a novel instead of some sort of like nonfiction thing, right? Where it's about like, right, if it's a nonfiction thing, it would be more about like, oh, this person had this like this like medical condition that made them like different than everyone else, and it could, and like this is how they overcame it, or like this is how it made their life difficult, right? And it kind of it's very like othering of this person, right? Even if it is sort of talking about how they overcame it, right? They're always like somehow like different or separate. And I think this book doesn't, like you were saying, right? It doesn't fall into either of those things, right? It's just he's a person. He has this medical condition, but it doesn't, like, it limits him in some ways, but it, in the same way that like people have limitations on and all sorts of things, right? There's like certain people can do things, other people like can't do things, right? And it never like, he's never like an outcast, right? And he never thinks of himself that way. I think that's what you're getting at.
Well, and also I think that I like that, like, instead of like focusing on that his like condition, it was more focusing using that condition to kind of look at like how people communicate or like how like relationships work. So I thought, like, I don't know, I liked how the author used it more like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And right, I think I'm sort of like flipping through my Kindle edition, right? I think after that like one chapter, I think it's chapter 6, I don't ever think they even really talk about the medical aspect of it again, right? It comes up a couple times like, oh, you're like, he talks a little bit about how he's trying to like develop his brain, right? Because they think like, if you like develop your brain, right, if it's like a muscle or whatever, then your amygdala will grow bigger and you'll sort of won't have this condition anymore, right? They talk about that, but it's never that, even that, it's not in terms of like treatment or fixing. It's always just in terms of like development, right? Or like personal growth or something, right? But, and they never, you said they never fixate on that sort of medical stuff because the book's not concerned with that, right? It's concerned with like how people relate to each other and how people interact with each other.
And that's kind of where like it comes in, where his mom kind of like, her way of sort of like preparing of like the world was to like teach him like social scripts and things, and like how to like act when someone is doing this, or like what facial expression or something. That was interesting.
Yeah, right. I guess I don't know, like, so this might be better saved at the end, but I think it's kind of relevant here. There's a little like afterword by the author, and they said in their afterword that like they wanted to write a book, or like their prompt or their question in writing this book was like they wanted to create characters that like they were thinking, could I love these characters if they were my children, right? So we haven't talked about Gon. How would you say Gon? Gon. Okay.
Gon.
We haven't talked about him yet, who's the other main character, right? But like, I think that's an interesting way to frame it, right? Like, could, there's sort of these interesting characters in this book. Now there's like, would I be able to like love them if they were my children, right? And I think, the mom, I mean, this is kind of difficult. I think the mom definitely loves him, right? But she, especially compared to his grandma, I would say, like, the mom is interested in changing him, where the grandma's not so much.
Yeah, Yeah, like the mom wants to kind of like make him better, whereas like the grandma's more accepting. And
Yeah.
it's just like, yeah.
Yeah, the mom is I think I wrote it down. There's some right. The mom wants him to like be normal, right? The mom doesn't want other people to look at him and be like, oh, there's something wrong with them, or they are different in some way, right? Right. There's a scene, or there's a like a passage in there about like that's like that's like love, right? Love is sort of, what does it say? Something about how that's like love, like responding to people and like doing that sort of stuff for them is a way to show love. And then he's sort of reflecting like, well, if I'm working so hard against what is like natural for me, like is that is that love? If she's like forcing me to work so hard against this, is she actually showing me love, right? Whereas the grandma is, yeah, a lot just more. I don't think the grandma sees him as like broken, right? She recognizes that
She
there's
calls
something
him
different,
adorable monster.
which is good, right? I think
Yeah.
captures the two sides of like him in terms of like what he's capable of, and then the things he struggles with a little bit. Yeah, he's living with his mom. Was that the end of your plot description, or was there more to that?
Well, I just stopped at like a spot.
Oh, do you want
I can
to?
keep going.
Yeah, pick it up.
All right. So then basically what happens, his mom finds out that he has this condition. His dad's dead. After years of estrangement, the mother and the grandmother reconcile, manage to cobble together a modest living running a secondhand bookstore from out of their apartment. The musty bookstore, which Yoonjae describes as quiet, filled with the voices of different experience, quickly becomes a place where he identifies the feeling of comfort.
Mm-hmm. I like, there was an interesting line in there where he talks about how like the books for him at that part of his life, they were like a way to access or like reference how people are, right? Which is like, I guess that's what like, yeah, like, right, books, movies, all of that stuff, right? They're all in some way a reflection of like whatever sort of life whatever experience a person's going through, right? If you're making something like that, it's going to be a reflection of that in some way. And so it's like interesting for a person who struggles a little bit with like empathizing or connecting with people in that way, to like be able to find it in books like that, right? It's cool that his mom runs a bookstore, right? And there's like all sorts of books. Pardon?
I have the quote that I think.
Oh yeah, go for it.
Books took me to places I could never go otherwise. They shared the confessions of people I've never met and lives I've never witnessed. The emotions I could never feel and the events I hadn't experienced could all be found in those volumes. And then he goes on to say, books had a lot of blanks between words, even between lines. I could squeeze myself in there and sit or walk or scribble down my thoughts. Doesn't matter if I had no idea what the words meant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's cool, right? Because I think we have like, we do a podcast about like books and movies and stuff, and it's, I think, right, when we're doing it, we're like talking about it, right? We're trying to like, oh, what is this? I think that sometimes your annoyance, or both of our annoyances, like we're trying to figure out like, oh, what is this saying, right? And it's, I don't know, I think it's just a cool or a nice reminder, right, that for people, right, just for people living a different experience than you, right, it's a books and all of this media is like a representation or like a capturing of that, and it really can be access to something that like we don't have otherwise. I like that bit. It like made me smile a little bit. All right, so you want to keep going with the summary? So they're running the bookstore.
Then tragedy strikes. On Yoonjae's 15th birthday, the family is involved in a random knife attack, resulting in the death of his grandmother and the confinement of his mother in a hospital bed in an unresponsive state. With the help of his kindly upstairs neighbor, Dr. Shim, and the lessons his mother embedded in his memory, Yoonjae tries to make his way alone in the world.
This is like the one part maybe I had some questions when we get to like the bookstore and the afterwards. But this is like the scene that opens the novel, right? Or he's like remembering this scene, and so I guess I don't. It's like horrible and hard, but something that is in there that is like interesting, right? And you don't like. At least I'm sure there are stories about this, but I've never like read anything, right? But there's a little bit in there about how in the media, right, he like went through this horrible thing. He lost his grandma and his mom is unresponsive, but as the sort of media like went through this story, he talks about how it went from being like this horrific violent act to sort of like questioning of, well, like, why did this person do it, right? And like they like go to his like apartment and they like see what's written in his journal, right? And like, why did he do it? And then like, oh, he was like upset, and like, society is sort of, he was on the outskirts of society and it sort of made him this way, right? And then it sort of turns to sympathy for the person who did this like really violent and horrible thing, and then there's no discussion anymore of like the victims or the people he hurt, because it was more, it was 6 people, right? It wasn't just the mom and the grandma, right? So there was like this large group of people that's like affected, and there's all of these secondary effects, right? But all the focus is on like sympathy for, or it becomes sympathy for like the aggressor instead of what happened after. And I don't know, like, I don't seek out a lot of like crime stories, so like hearing a book be able to like include that perspective and a person thinking about that, I don't know, I thought that was interesting. Did you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, as far as like talking about the other people that the guy killed, I guess I wasn't like, I feel like that probably wasn't included just because it's not like they're not part of like,
Yeah. I guess I wouldn't expect it to talk about them so much, right? Because this is, yeah.
And also, hang on, I'm just trying to find it. But like, I feel like kind of talking about how people started to sympathize with the dude. I think that kind of also goes to like another weird like emotion, I guess, that maybe Yoonjae noticed, doesn't really understand, but is more just like I don't know. It's just like another weird like
You
human
mean
thing
like,
that people do.
yeah, and he's sort of being a little bit more, I wouldn't say he's like objective, but he is, just because of the way his brain works, right? He's like a little bit more emotionally removed, so he's able to like reflect on that maybe. And yeah, I guess I don't have like something, I don't have like anything interesting to say, right? But I guess we see this is like the whole true crime thing, right? And do you watch a lot of true crime? I know, or
Criminal Minds.
But like, like the right, these stories, and like, I don't know, kind of like, it's really popular on like Netflix and stuff, right? You watch like the Jinx or like Making a Murder, right? Like taking these really horrific stories and just, I mean, those shows are like finding the entertainment value, right? Figuring out how to tell that story in a way that's really entertaining on TV or on a podcast or something. This isn't really talking about that, but often like those characters in those shows or podcasts or whatever, right? They do become, in order for the audience to care, the person at the center of it, even if that person is a killer, right? They have to be sympathetic in some way. Because if your audience doesn't care about them, your audience isn't going to pay attention, right? And so like, how are you going to tell that story to make them, you have to do something to the telling of that story to make them sympathetic, right? And so it's like, happens a lot in the media. I guess it's kind of interesting, right? If this is, this is a story by a Korean author, and they, other side of the world, they see that thing happening in their media, right? In their country as well, right? Something that's like really common over here, right? And over here, it's like when it's on the news, it's often very like racialized, right? If it's like, if we're talking about like a mass shooting or something, right? Like the difference between if the shooter is white versus the shooter is non-white is like the way that they're treated is hugely different, right? There's often a lot of sympathy if they're white, and like, oh, what was done to them, or like how did they become this thing, versus like if they're a person of color, if they're like black or brown, right there, it's often a focus on like their personal flaws and there isn't any like sympathy for them, even if it's the same sort of thing. So I guess that is maybe the most interesting, right? In a novel translated from the other side of the world, like they see this same pattern playing out in their media as well. Yeah. I mean, horrible, maybe interesting is the wrong word. It's like, it's a horrible pattern. But,
yeah.
All right.
All right, we'll keep going.
Keep going. Yeah.
Shortly thereafter, a man named Professor Yoon comes to the bookstore and asks
wait. One thing though. So sorry, you said it was his 15th birthday?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's afterwards, he's taking care of this bookstore by himself. This was the one thing I just had like questions about. Like, I guess if he was like 18, or I guess I don't know how the laws work, but you're right. If he's 18, it's like, okay, fine, technically he's an adult, he like goes by himself, but like 15, and he seems to just like go ahead and take care of this bookstore.
Also because Dr. Shim, the guy who lives upstairs, he's like financially supporting Yoonjae.
Okay.
Because the mom asked Dr. Shim to like look after him if something ever happened to her.
Okay, I
so
forgot.
It's like he's not like completely on his own. He's got like an adult who's like making sure he's still alive and stuff.
Okay, all right. I must have missed that part.
Yeah.
All right, keep going.
Shortly thereafter, a man named Professor Yoon visits a bookstore and asks Yoonjae for a favor. Because he looks so much like his son, Goon, Professor Yoon wants Yoonjae to visit his dying wife posing as Goon. Actually, it might be Gon. I don't know.
God.
We're gonna call him Goon. Goon disappeared as a child, recently resurfacing with extreme behavioral issues. Professor Yoon does not think he is fit to see his mother, so Yoonjae agrees. Mrs. Yoon dies shortly after. That was weird.
Yeah. I
mean, like, I don't think too much into it because I was like, it's probably just for the story. But like, that was weird. In real life, that would not make sense.
Yeah, well, I think if we're thinking about this, if we sort of keep, right, I think if we get back to that author's, like, if their motivation for writing it, like, I want to create these characters that I need to, like, think through and reflect on, like, could I love them in real life, or, right, if they were my kids, right? And I think there's I have the line here, right, but Dr. Shim, right, the story, right, him and his wife went to, like, an amusement park, and while they were there, somehow Goon wandered off or got lost, right? And they couldn't find him.
He was like kidnapped, basically, right?
Oh, was he actually kidnapped?
Yes, because he was raised by like this Chinese couple, and then I think they like moved away because of immigration, and they left him.
Yes.
And then he's kind of just been like all over the place, foster and stuff.
So they can't find him. And then a couple weeks, right, his Dr. Shim's wife goes into the coma. A couple weeks before she ultimately dies, right, he is like told that Goon is found. He goes to visit him, and like I think I don't have the exact line, right, but he goes to see him, and the line is something like, that isn't the person, like that person can't go visit my wife, right, like that, right, and so you see this very like flat, obvious, or whatever word, like you see this very obvious rejection, right? That is a person who's saying like, this person is my son, right? Maybe, I haven't seen them for a while. They were taken away from me, right? But this is my son, but like, no, right? Like that person is sort of rejecting and saying, I can't love this person, right? And my wife can't love this person, even in her sort of her sort of sickly state. I don't want her to think of this as her son, right? Like that person, Goon, is not good enough to be our son, right? And so, that's like one response to meeting someone like Goon, right? Is that sort of rejection, right? And like we'll talk a little bit in a second about how what's that? Sorry, and you gotta remind me of our main character's name. Yoon-jae, right? We'll see from them another response of like how to approach and interact with Goon, right? And what they think upon first meeting him, and then like and as their relationship develops.
Maybe it might be gone. I think it's gone.
Gone.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, so Dr. Shin gets Yoon-jae to go to the hospital and be like, I'm your son, and then the wife dies shortly thereafter. I don't know if you read this far in your summary, right? But the one thing that I had a question about is how the story of that got out, right? Because it seems like everyone knows that happened.
That what happened?
That he went to the hospital and pretended to be their son, and that seems like something like you would try really hard to.
Yoon-jae went,
Yeah,
and then Gon showed up.
Yeah,
and he was like, "Oh, you're the one who."
But how would Gon know that? Like, how would he know that someone visited his mom pretending to be the son?
Like, mom's dead. Oh, well, then why didn't I get to see her? Oh, well, actually, you kind of did.
So you're saying he might have just like put the pieces together, right? Because otherwise there would be no reason for Yoon-jae to be at the funeral. There's not really a reason for him to be there anyways. I also have a question about why he went to the funeral, because that seems like you don't know.
Probably maybe he just was like another just like weird, just like might as well. He probably didn't. I don't know. Maybe if he didn't have the almond problem, he would think, I probably don't.
Oh, okay.
Like socially, whatever.
Yeah.
All right, let's keep going.
Okay.
Then Gon appears at school, furious with Yoon-jae for taking his place as his parents' son. Gon bullies Yoon-jae for weeks. When he realizes he cannot get the desired response out of Yoon-jae, Gon's bitterness turns to curiosity. He starts visiting Yoon-jae at the bookstore. With Dr. Shim's help, he realizes that he and Gon want to be friends with one another. In the coming months, they grow increasingly close. Gon tries teaching Yoon-jae how to feel, and Yoon-jae encourages Gon to discard his tough demeanor.
All right, so this it's probably like the biggest chunk of the book, maybe them getting to know each other. Not a like ton happens, right? Like he's running the bookstore and like figuring out if he wants to keep it, whatever, and sort of learning to be friends with Gon, right? Whatever that is going to look like. I don't know, what did you think about like their relationship there, how they interact with each other?
I think it was interesting, especially because the way that Yoon-jae, like the narrator described it, was like a monster meeting another monster. And I thought that was like an interesting way of like talking about it. And
it brings out the thing that the grandma said, right? He called him, like you said before, right? The grandma called him an adorable monster, right? But like if we want to like use that word, right, when we're thinking about them, right, it's for like very different reasons, right? Because Gon is abrasive. He's like very standoffish, right? He has this like tough exterior, right? And so we're gonna like see it's all sort of.
He's actually just a big softie.
Well, kind of, right? But
right.
I think we get the impression over time, right? We don't. It doesn't go too much into Gon's backstory, right? But yeah, he was with this Chinese couple who had to leave, and then he went to like foster homes or orphanages, right? Until he was reunited with Dr. Shim, right? But along the way, you get the idea that like enough people told him what type of person he was, even if he didn't necessarily know who he was, right? And that's a difficult thing to do, right? Or even if he didn't like believe them, if that happens enough, you're gonna like internalize that, oh, I am that thing. And so he's sort of a monster in this more traditional sense, where he's like kind of like a bad person, right? Whereas Yoon-jae has, the thing that he struggles with, I think that makes him a little bit different, is something more internal, right? It's not so obvious, and it doesn't he looks at the world a little bit of a different way, right? But it's not because someone like, and I guess kind of, right, he had his mom telling him that he shouldn't do this thing, right? Like this, he also had his mom telling him this thing about you is like bad, but right, he for some reason never, I don't know if he ever totally like believed his mom, right? He like took in the lessons because he realized they made his life easier, but I don't know if he ever like believed when she said that, right? That like she was doing that for his benefit, or like that was the better way to behave. I think he was always like a little bit skeptical.
Yeah, but also it's just like going back to like the mom, I don't think she ever said it was like bad. I think, I don't know. In the summary it says, just interested in turning her son into a science expert, the mom assumes full control over emotional education. I don't know, going back to, I guess, what we were talking about a little bit before, like the mom obviously like loves Yoon-jae.
Yeah.
I don't think she was doing all of that to like change him because she wanted him to be different. I think it was more to change him so that he would have like an easier life with other people.
I think that's the tricky question though, right? Is like, she's doing it because she says she wants him to have an easier life, but like, and I don't think there's a right answer to this, right? And I'm not trying to like judge his mom or say she did the wrong thing, right? I think this is like why it's super freaking difficult to like be a parent, right? Because like, what are you doing for your kid, or just any, right, your friend, or I don't know if you're like a mentor to someone, right? What are you like doing? What lessons are you trying to teach them because you think it will be better for them, versus like, how do you want them to be, right? This comes a little bit later. This is there's a scene towards the end, and I think it's one of the final times in the book that Yoon-jae is talking to Dr. Shim, right? And I think Dr. Shim asks him like, what do you, because at this point him and him go, right, by the end of the book they're like very good friends, right? It's not like an easy relationship, but they are like very good friends. And we'll talk about there's like I want to talk a little bit about like the thing with the butterfly, because there's some interesting stuff there. But he asks him like, is like, I forget if he asked, Dr. Shim asked him like, why do you hang out with Gon, or like, do you think Gon is a good person, right? And Yoon-jae's like, if I told you all the things he did, right, the way he behaves at school, the people he hangs out with, right, if I explained his actions, that he wouldn't be a good person, right? And he says something like, language, it can't always describe like the nature of a person, right? But he's like, deep down inside of me, I believe that he is a good person, but I can't exactly tell you why, right? And Dr. Shim sort of, he struggles, right? He can't sort of think about Gon in that way, right? But he says parents want, and again, there's like a general statement, right? Parents want ordinary kids, even though being ordinary is like the hardest thing to achieve, right? And so like, and again, not like to judge mom, right? But she says she wants Yoon-jae to be ordinary, wants him to be normal, right? Because that's going to make his life easier. But I guess maybe he's skeptical, right? And this goes back to the like thing when he's thinking about like, well, what is love, right? Is that emotional education she's trying to give him to make his life easier? Is that like also a little bit to make like her life easier, right? And the answer could be both, right? Because like people are complicated and it can be for more than one reason. I know I kind of rambled a little bit there. If you've been in response to like and to that,
No.
no response.
I don't know. I feel like you see it in a different way than I do.
Well, what do you? So you're. Well, what do you, tell me what you're taking away from.
Well, it's like if you had like a kid who like had something that was gonna make his life a little bit more difficult.
Yeah.
You know, and like if you thought you could change it, or you thought you could do something to help that thing like get better, so the kid like his life can get better. You know, it's not.
Yeah.
Because I never got the impression that the mom ever thought that her son was like a burden or anything, or someone that she had to like fix. Not like in like that way.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's totally right.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's totally right.
All right, let's. Do you want to talk about the butterfly?
Yeah. So, yeah, explain that scene a little bit. That's an interesting scene.
So, Gon tries to like get like emotion out of Yoonjae by bringing a butterfly in and tearing its wings off.
Yeah.
And Yoonjae, can't like feel that empathy, so he doesn't react like at all. But Gon seems to be really affected by it. And Yoonjae, I guess, goes and talks to Dr. Shim about it, and he's just like, what was up with that? And I think that kind of shows like how like Gon is also like a little softy, you know?
Yeah, it's like tearing him up inside to like do this, right? And he wants his, trying to continue that sort of emotional education that the mom was doing, right? He was like, this should make you feel something, right? Like a normal, quote unquote, right? A person looking at this this is like horrible, right? This is like a horrible thing to do, even though it's just a butterfly, right? And Gon's like crying, and then like afterwards he smushes it into the ground or whatever, like the body, but then like afterwards Yoonjae talks about how he like came back and like cleaned it up and like he was crying the whole time, right? And I think Gon, even though Gon is, believes, or he's telling himself a story about the type of person he is, and like based on, I think kind of what he has been told, right? I guess we see a little bit about how he's treated in school from the teachers, and maybe those experiences he had when he was a kid separated from his parents, but like he still has that, like he still feels everything, right? And I think that's sort of, that's like, it's kind of a little bit of a trope we've seen before, right? Someone who's actually like really, really empathetic, right? Who feels a lot of things, has this really hard exterior, more for self-preservation than anything else, maybe, right? Because they feel things so intensely. And I think, in that's another one of those moments, right? If he's, talking to Dr. Shim, right? He ripped the wings off a butterfly, right? But what he's actually seeing go through in that sense, right? Kind of when Dr. Shim asks him, like, is Gon a good person, or why do you like him, right? He's seeing something deeper that is telling him, like, oh, this actually, Gon actually is a good person. This is my friend, right? Like he never wavers in that commitment all the way to the end. Yeah. So that kind of, what's that laugh for?
Which we will get to.
Yeah.
After the break. I'm kidding.
That kind of takes us. I guess there's also. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about Dora.
Well, that's in the next little thing.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't really understand this part anyways. Later in the year, Dora appears at school. Yoonjae is fascinated by her. Soon they become friends. Their closeness develops into something deeper. Through Dora, Yoonjae learns how to perceive beauty and even begins feeling his own emotions. Dr. Shim congratulates him on his growth.
Mm-hmm. I
So, like...
I don't know. I don't know if you picked up on this, but there was I was looking through it, and like the first time I read it, but I was trying to go through some of those chapters when he's getting to know Dora before we started recording, and I couldn't I couldn't find exactly what, but the first time I read them, right, it's, you know, it says it opens him up to like beauty and like emotional development, and I we get this, we're supposed to get the sense that he like likes her in a romantic sort of way,
Yeah.
or yeah, and I think I think we're probably supposed to believe he's never really felt those sort of feelings for someone else before, and then there's also like a little bit of I can't pick out the words the way, like there were some words that stood out to me the first time I read it, and I can't pick them out again, but like, oh, he's like also a teenage boy going through puberty, like feeling things that
It's like, is he just like horny?
he
Like, I
might
was
just
just
feel
confused.
that might just be it. I guess I was dancing around saying it, but there was some like words in there. I was like, oh, maybe this is just the first time he's been like really horny.
Yeah.
But
Which that was kind of, that's where I was just like, man, I hope this isn't like turned into like, I mean, it doesn't matter that like Goon like killed a butterfly for you. This like girl comes along and suddenly you're fixed. I was just like, I hope it. I was worried that we become like super cliche after that, but
yeah,
I think ultimately it wasn't.
yeah,
Ultimately, I didn't really see her as like a super huge part of the story.
yeah. No, it. I think you take her out. I actually don't know if it changes that much, right? I think she's maybe serves the purpose of, right, because they say something in there, right? Whenever she started visiting the bookstore, and whenever she was there, Gon wasn't there, right? And so maybe
Mhm.
she serves, you know, I have I kind of an idea of her like thematic tie-in, but I think she also serves the plot thing of like there is a little bit more separation between Yunjae and Gon towards the end of the, right. They're like they're not getting, they're maybe growing a, right, if the for before that they've been growing together. I think once Dora shows up, they're growing apart a little bit, right, so that they're not like in close communication when the like ending sort of kicks off, right, which is kind of necessary. So I think she serves a little bit of like a plot function in that sense. But I think, right, you know, now I'm kind of like, you know, we sort of brought up that question from the author, right? And I think Dora's another example of, right, that, right? Because she is just like, she wants to run. That's her whole thing, right? She like is really into
Right, and I was
running.
just like, weirdo.
She wants, I think she specifically wants to, I forget if it's like the 800 or something, but it's like, you know, she wants to run. She runs everywhere. That's like what she's training for. And her parents like don't like it, right? They don't want the thing that she wants to be and do, right? They don't want that for her. They want her to like have a more focus on her studies and like have a more traditional, you know, career trajectory or whatever, right? And like
Yeah.
another example, right? I think, you know, I think there's a reading of this book where it's like how adults sort of view and, you know, accept or reject via like specific, like direct actions or words or indirect actions, right, can sort of like accept or reject their children, right? I think Dora's an example of like, you know, going against what her parents, why her parents don't want her to do a thing, right? And she's like fine, she kind of seems to like blow it off or whatever. But another example, right, of sort of she knows who she is and what she is, and like has the strength to sort of stay true to that. It sounds weird because it's something like running, but like, you know, if you're really like, if you're deep down inside, you're like, I'm a runner, then like you have to, you know,
And you're a
screw the
runner.
haters. Yeah. R.I.P. to the haters, but I'm different. All right, yeah. So that's Dora, right? Not like kind of a side thing, but like an interesting character for a second.
Mhm. All right. Meanwhile, Gon has become friends with a series of mischievous and violent teens. Desperate to save his friend from a bad situation, Yoonjae pursues him only to be attacked by one of Gon's new comrades, Steelwire. Seeing his friend in pain, Gon weeps and apologizes to Yoonjae.
So you just said, right, like Dora doesn't become this big character. It doesn't sort of dissolve into this maybe more stereotypical ending where either her or even Gon, right, like kind of either of them in a romantic sense or just in like a friend sense, sort of their friendship is sort of the thing that like fixes Yoonjae, right? He never, right? Again, like you said, the mom doesn't want to fix him. That word never comes up, right? No one is like trying to fix him, right? But he is aware that he's trying to like develop. I guess, what did you think about this ending, right? Was it like a little too much? I guess it's not stereotypical, right? If we're talking about like this type of story, right? It doesn't dissolve into something like stereotypical. Did you think it was like too much? Did you like it? What did you think?
I read it and I was like, oh, that's it? Because I feel like it all happened kind of fast.
Okay.
And then like at the hospital, I'll just quickly read the last bit. Healing from the wounds Steelwire inflicted, Dr. Shimmel's mom in to see Yoonjae. She's woken from the coma and is recovering. She cries when she learns how much Yoonjae has grown. After graduating from high school, Yoonjae embraces life, family, feeling human. I thought that everything at the end happened pretty quickly.
Wait, is that really how it wraps it all up?
Yeah.
Oh, I forgot it does that quickly. I know like the move towards the ending is definitely pretty quick, right? So like we said, they're not Yoonjae and Gon are hanging out a bunch because Dora's coming around. So Gon has made these like new friends, and you know, Yoonjae learns that Gon's got himself in a bad situation. He has to like go to sort of get him out of that, and he meets this guy named Steelwire, and Steelwire like won't let them. He's like, you know, kind of like to let Gon go. You know, you have to like give me something. They sort of, it gets violent. Steelwire is gonna stab Gon, and then Yoonjae steps in front, and he gets stabbed, and then Gon stabs Steelwire, and everyone's able to like get away.
No one dies.
Yeah, no one dies, which is good. But it's well. So let me read. I made one note here. So there's, I don't know if this is all the way at the end. I think it might be when he's in the hospital, like recovering. But he's talking about like he's talking about like I think it's before that actually. I think it's before when he's talking to Dr. Shim about where Gon is, and he sees something on the news, right? And it's like this horrific. I think there's some sort of like horrific natural disaster, right? And Dr. Shim was just watching that on the news, right? And there's no sort of he has no sort of emotional response to that, right? Because you don't, right? You see like horrible things on the news going on in some part of the world, and like that's horrible, but like that's kind of where oftentimes it's where the emotions end, right? And so and again, I'm not exactly sure. I know it's towards the end, right? But he says something about like he doesn't want to live a life where you feel but don't act, and he doesn't want to live a life where you have sympathy but forget, right? Where you can have that sort of cognitive separation, right? That sort of, you can see something on a screen and recognize it's not affecting you directly, and you can sort of separate yourself from it mentally, right? You can remove from yourself from that situation, right? He's saying that also happens, and it does, right? It also happens when something's immediate, right? When it's the local news, or when it's just, as he saw it, when it's a person committing a violent act out in the street, right? Because no one came to help his mom or his grandma or the other people who were stabbed, right? And there's a sense in which he is, right, he sees the way that everyone else seems to behave, and he's like, I don't want to be like that, right? And even if it's more difficult, even if it's like puts you in a tough situation, right, he wants to be someone who like sees some things and act, right? And so I think there's the book does an interesting thing, right, where it's sort of in a more traditional story where like his medical condition, right, with his amygdala, like, is something that like he has to like fix or get over or like figure out how to deal with. The book is showing us the way in which it is like a benefit, right? A way in which it benefits his life and gives him these like other perspectives, right? This other way to like live. And I think that's why it's not super, or at least I haven't read a ton of books that like kind of are dealing with these themes and do something like that. And I guess I'd say that's why it's not super stereotypical. And I really liked how it like, you know, it had this more action filled ending than like the rest of the book, but it made space for that like reflection and him sort of talking about the life he wants to live and how that sort of fits in or around like this thing he has with his amygdala, right? Which is something he still has to deal with. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about the ending, or even just like kind of what you took away from the book in the end?
Not sure.
Not sure.
I don't know. I closed the book and I was like, huh, good book. What's privilege? To be honest,
Okay.
I'm not that much of a deep thinker, I guess.
Did anything I mean, just going thinking about the whole book, did anything stick with you? Do you think? I mean, you liked it enough to like recommend it, and I'm really glad you did. Like, I'm glad you read this book, but I think like something must have stood out. I would imagine.
I liked the language, and I think I also liked, even though I don't know Korean or anything, I don't know anything about the language.
Yeah.
I think I really can like appreciate how the work that it probably went into like translating the book, because like the Korean author, when you write from the perspective of someone who doesn't feel anything, but then also like you need to show growth, but also like reasonable amount of growth, and then also like to sort of read it and have to like kind of know that this is like the same thought has been put into like the person, like the person who translated put in that same amount of like time and thought. I don't know, I like that.
I mean, you totally like nailed. I want to read this one paragraph. Like, you kind of just summed it up totally, but there's one paragraph from the translator that kind of says exactly what you were just saying. My focus for you and Jay specifically was ensuring he consistently sounds emotionally removed but not dull, and as a bibliophile, not less articulate in expressing his limited emotions and observations. On top of that, Yoon Jae's emotional ability develops throughout the book. I want to show his growth through language and bridge his emotional distance. The same goes for Gon, but in an opposite way. His complex emotions needed to be in a much simpler tone due to his lack of vocabulary, not to mention his harsh language. Yeah, right? Like, I didn't think about that until you just said it, right? But thinking about like the work, right? How do you... And not like, I don't know, I'm not a writer, I don't know how you would do this, right? But both of these authors, right, the original author and the translator, put in this work of like, how do you make this person sound, right? They're sounding smart, but they're removed, but that language needs to be interesting. But then they're also, as you go through the book, right, you have to have these sort of levels, they reveal more and more, right? You have to communicate this growth just through their language, and yeah, the way they did it throughout this book, like it's amazing, because his progress never feels like cheap or unearned. I don't know, would you agree with that? It feels like natural.
Yeah.
It's like the way they did that is really awesome. I haven't. Oh, I've read a couple like Russian novels, but I haven't read a like ton of translated stuff. I was really glad they put the little like note from the translator in here, because you don't like, I don't know, you read someone wrote in English and just like think this is the way it's supposed to be, right? But with like a translated novel, there has to be that extra layer of like, what's the author saying and how do I translate this for like into English, right? And like, how do, you're thinking about like context and like syntax and like connotation and denotation, right? And like the meaning of the word, like that word itself versus its like common meaning and its use in context, right? So like that's, all that stuff is really fascinating. All right, any last thoughts, Ange?
No.
All right, so we'll be back.
And whoever the other Joseph Glowacki email I sent it to, who accepted it. I hope you enjoyed the book.
Oh, you should tell that story. That's a good story.
Yeah, well, so I bought the book to send to Joey because you can do that through Kindle, Amazon. But Joey decided to be quirky and spell Glowacki with a Y instead of an I at the end. And I didn't know that, so I sent it to a different email. And I was like, Joe was like, I didn't get it. And then I was like, that's weird. It says that you accepted it.
Yeah.
So whoever, they accepted it. So I hope they read it and I hope they enjoyed it.
I hope they read it, and yeah, I do hope they enjoyed it, right? I hope it was an unexpected surprise for them.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right, we will be back after this with our one-shots after this short break. We are back with our one-shots for this week. And why don't you have something, or you want me to go first?
You can go first.
Okay. So my one-shot for this week is a animated TV show. It's on Disney Plus. It's called The Bad Batch. It is. Did you ever watch any of the Clone Wars animated show, Ange?
Only when you were watching it.
Only when I was okay. So it's a spin-off of that show. So they made like 5 seasons of that show, and then when Disney bought Lucasfilm, and then when they launched Disney Plus, they made a 7th and final season of that show. And in the final season, the main characters like Ahsoka and them run into this group of clones called the Bad Batch, and now there's a whole show about the Bad Batch, who are these group of, is it 5 or 6 clones? One of them kind of goes off and does his own thing. I think it's 6 of them, and they're clones, but they were like clones with sort of special abilities, so they're not your normal clones that just turn into stormtroopers. But
your normal clone.
Well, yeah, there's like, it's a whole Star Wars thing. But it's really interesting. I mean, I just love this. I love Star Wars, the animated series, is one of my favorite TV shows, period. And just getting more of that type of storytelling, right? Where it's like, it's like a 30-minute episode, but it's like really jam-packed. They put all of like the Star Wars stuff in there. So that's exciting to see. But then also it is thinking about, what does it mean to be a recreation of some other person's genes, and then when you were bred for the purpose of fighting, as they were, right? And then the war has shifted, as it does after Order 66, right after this big like Star Wars event, sort of the sides shift, and they have to decide like where their allegiances are. And I don't think the Star Wars movies do a great job with just thinking about what is it like to be a person in the Star Wars universe. And, I think we've gotten more of that from like, some video games and like some other animated shows like Rebels in more recent times. And this show is like really continuing that, where you're seeing like life on a bunch of different types of planets. And then like kind of, if they're just going to be normal people, they're just going to stop being, fighters if they can. Like, what does it look like to just be a normal person in this universe? So that's always really interesting. And yeah, that's on Disney Plus. If you're interested. What do you got?
Is it a kids show?
I mean, it's
okay
animated. I mean, there's no like blood. There's never any blood in this, and it's animated. They don't like swear, but like I would say it deals with like, I would say there's like more death in this version of the show than there was in like those early seasons of the Clone Wars animated show. I don't know. Star Wars is always a tricky one, right? Because even like the Star Wars movies, right? You never see blood, right? It's always because they always say like the laser bolts or the lightsabers, right? Because it's like so hot, it like cauterizes the wound or whatever. So like that's their reason for never showing blood or everything. But I don't know, like people die, like there's death, you know. I think those are tricky ones. Like when do you show a kid that, you know, when can you like have that conversation about what death is, and like if you get attached to a character and that character dies, right? Can your like kid handle that? You know, I think that's like a different age for everyone. But you know, it probably does fall more into the kid show than the adult show, if than anything though. But yeah, what do you got in?
You know Bretman Rock?
No, I don't. Is that a person's name?
Yeah, it's like an internet person. I don't know if it's his real name. I became aware of his existence when I started watching people play, what's it called? Among Us. Remember when that was like a thing?
Yeah.
And he would often play with like Toast, Valkyrie, Jacksepticeye, all of those people. He's really funny. He's like, but he's not a gamer. He's a Filipino beauty influencer and social media personality based in Honolulu, Hawaii. Says his thing. And so he's really funny. I don't know. He's his personality is kind of known for being like not flamboyant, but like very like he like has a lot of makeup, a lot of fashion. He's like very fashionable. But he's also known for being like super like family oriented and like, but like he's like this really rich guy with like his big nice house, you know, in Hawaii. And there's a series going around, I think it's called like Bretman in the Wilderness or something, where so he was born in the Philippines, and so he lived with his dad there, and the whole thing is, he was super poor living with his dad, and like Bretman Rock, after he got kind of famous and successful, his dad died, and I think there was something going on where like he was not like, there was like a phone call that he didn't return or something, and then his dad died, and that's sort of been like weighing on him. And he was talking about how like him and his dad were like not like survivalists, but like they didn't have a lot. They were very poor, and so he is doing this thing where he's going to like live in the jungle. I don't know if it's like for a week. I think it's for a week. Sort of as like a personal, like to honor his dad, also to see if he can do it, because he like kind of like go back to his roots, I guess, in a sort of way. But it's like it's the second episode came out on Wednesday, I think, and it's super funny because Bretman Rock is very funny. Like even one point he was like trying to make a fire and he's like, why am I doing this? I'm rich. And it was just like, it's really funny. And he's definitely like, you know, like how like influencers can kind of just be like cringe, you know?
Yeah.
But like as far as influencers go, I feel like he's really funny. He seems really down to earth, and like I don't know. I wish that there were more episodes because we want to watch all of them.
Yeah. Even just like I've been I don't know if you saw it. There was like a thing the other day, I think just like yesterday or something, about like some of the top influencers or streamers, specifically like Pokimane and other people, doing like room tours. And then like someone did it and like their room was really dirty, and then all the commenters were like, but like everyone knows there's a millionaire. Or there was even this other stream, like did you hear about that streamer? The guy streamed, was like, he had like a 24-hour stream. He wasn't awake, but the stream was always going. He did it for like a month or something.
What's his name? Yeah,
I forget it, right? And it's but like he's like one of the top streamers on Twitch, right? He is like a millionaire. And so just even you saying, right, like that thing where like
Ludwig.
Yeah, right, where even just a streamer willing to like acknowledge like I'm doing something ridiculous. If it has like I like the idea that it has like personal meaning for him, right? It can also be for the views. It can be for like both. But then just like, I am rich, and when this is over, like I'm gonna go back to like my nice house or whatever, and just sort of like, I don't know. I feel like streamer. This is shitty to say probably, but like some of that self-awareness is nice, right? Because like these like the top streamers, like they're not just like in their bedroom streaming and like then they like go like they're not then they go to their job, right? Like because there are people who do that, who like they stream and they also work like 40 hours a week, right? These are like millionaires. These are people who are like super rich, who like probably have like talent agencies like that manage them or whatever, right? And they're living a whole different life, and like it's okay to sort of, I like it when a streamer is willing to like let you in on that side of a thing, right? They are living this like weird different other life. And they're not just like, I don't know, you can be funny, you don't necessarily have to be super relatable, right? Just like, but you're just here, we're all here for the laughs or whatever, right? I don't know. So it's cool that he can like acknowledge that. That sounds really cool, actually.
Yeah.
That's Brett. You said Bretman Rock?
Bretman Rock.
Okay, nice. We'll have a link.
He's also, it's very funny to listen to him play Among Us with all of these gamers.
Nice.
Because they're all like, oh, like gamer jargon, and he's just like, what?
Oh, and he's not a game. Oh,
he's not a gamer. So he's just like, what are you talking about? What's a comms?
Oh, that actually sounds good. That sounds good. Did you put a link? Is that linked to his to the series?
Trailer of the series.
To the trailer of the series. Okay, nice.
You should watch it real quick.
I will. I don't want the audio to bleed over, so I'll watch it afterwards. But that is our show for the week. Everyone, thank you for listening. You can follow Angela on Instagram at glow.angela or at IJOONE_. You can follow me on Twitter at Joey Glowacki. That's JoeyGlowacky. The music you heard in this episode is a lo-fi remix of the song Concerning Hobbits by Patrick Moonbird. You can find their music on Spotify and SoundCloud. Please rate and review this episode on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast listening app. You can also email this show by sending your messages to podcast@comicslate.com. All reviews and messages are greatly appreciated. That's it for this week, everyone. We hope you join us next. We hope you enjoyed it, and join us next time on the podcast. We're not sure what it will be yet, but there will be another episode.
Inside, but I don't know.
Oh yeah, that's going to be the next one. Bo Burnham's Inside, right? We got to watch that because I want to.
Well, I've already watched it.
I got to watch it. I've like, it came up on like 2 different podcasts, and I like skipped it because I was like, no, I want to like get my own thoughts, and we're going to talk about it. So yeah, Bo Burnham's Inside on Netflix will be our next episode. I'm excited to watch that one, actually. All right, but yeah, thanks for being with us today, and we'll see you later. Bye.
Bye.